The number I couldn't stop thinking about was $340,000. That was the appraised value of the house at 114 Callaway Street, the one with the green shutters that my grandmother painted herself in 1987, the one with the rose bushes she'd been cultivating for 31 years along the south fence, the one where she still slept in the same bed she'd shared with my grandfather for 42 years before he died. $340,000. And my parents had already found a buyer. My grandmother was still inside. Welcome back to Family Revenge Stories New, the channel where quiet people keep the receipts, and family learns that love without documentation is just a wish. If you've ever watched someone mistake patience for weakness, you're in the right place. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and let's get into it. My name is Aurora Grace. I am a licensed estate planning paralegal. I have been for 11 years. I work under a probate attorney named David Marsh, and my specific job, the thing I do every single day, is read documents that families assumed were straightforward and find the places where they were not. I am very good at this job. I am good at it because I grew up in a family that operated on assumptions. My parents are people who believe that what is understood does not need to be said, and that what is said does not necessarily need to be written down. My mother will tell you she's a very clear communicator. She is not. She is a woman who communicates in implications, and then acts surprised when other people didn't receive the implication she intended. My father is quieter. He defers to my mother in most things, and when he doesn't, it's because he's decided something on his own and informed everyone of the decision after the fact. He is not a cruel man. He is a man who has never once in his life asked whether the thing he was about to do was allowed. I grew up the third of 4 children. My older sister Renata is 8 years my senior, and has operated as my mother's deputy since approximately 1994. My brother Marcus, 5 years older than me, left for Phoenix at 22 and checks in at Christmas. My younger brother Eli is the baby, 31 years old and still treated as 22, still given the benefit of the doubt that the rest of us stopped receiving around high school. My grandmother, my father's mother, is named Dolores. She is 81 years old. She is sharp. She does her own crossword puzzles in pen. She grows tomatoes. She has strong opinions about daytime television, and stronger opinions about people who arrive late. She has lived at 114 Callaway Street since 1973, when my grandfather bought the house for $62,000, and she has never expressed any desire to live anywhere else. She is also, as of the moment this story begins, 5 years into a diagnosis of moderate cognitive decline. That is the context my parents built their plan around. It was a Thursday in March when I found out. Not from my parents. Not from a family meeting. I found out the way I find out most things in my family, from a second-hand comment that arrived with no warning. My Aunt Phyllis called me at 7:14 in the evening. I know the time because I was still at my desk, eating a sandwich I'd heated at 5:30 and forgotten about, and I just looked at my phone to see how late I'd let it get. Phyllis said, "I assume you've already heard about the house." I set down my sandwich. I said, "Which house?" There was a pause. The kind of pause that means the person on the other end of the phone has just realized they were supposed to be the second person to tell you this, not the first. She told me what she knew. My parents have found a senior living facility 40 minutes from their home. They had toured it twice, once in January and once in February. I noted that neither visit had been mentioned to me. They had put a deposit down on a unit. They had hired a real estate agent. The agent had suggested a listing price of $349,000. They had accepted an offer, not a listed price, an accepted offer, of $336,500. The closing date was 6 weeks away. My grandmother had been told she was going to have company soon, and that the house was getting some attention. Those were the words Phyllis reported. Company. Attention. I sat at my desk for a long time after I hung up with Phyllis. I did not call my parents. I opened a new document on my computer and I started typing what I knew. Dates, dollar amounts, the words Phyllis had used, the timeline as I understood it. This is what I do when I need my hands to do something while my mind is trying to catch up with what it's been told. The document was 3 pages long by the time I stopped. I saved it. I labeled it. I closed my laptop and I went to find the phone number for my grandmother's attorney. Her name was Vera Gaines. She'd handled my grandfather's estate 22 years earlier, and when I called her office the next morning and explained who I was and what I was calling about, she said, "Yes, I've been waiting for someone from that family to call." That sentence landed somewhere behind my sternum and stayed there. We met in her office on a Friday afternoon. I brought my notepad. She had a file folder on her desk that was thicker than I expected. She told me first what my parents may or may not have known. And I want to be precise here because this is the part where the ground shifts. The house at 114 Callaway Street was not solely my grandmother's to sell. In 1999, my grandfather, before his death, while he still had full capacity, had executed a transfer on death deed with a specific restricted condition. The deed transferred the property to my grandmother upon his death, which it did. But attached to that deed was a recorded life estate clause, drafted by Vera herself, which stated in plain language that my grandmother retained the right to occupy the property for the remainder of her natural life. This clause did not require Dolores to ask permission. It did not require her to vacate upon cognitive decline. It did not include a family override provision. It was a legal instrument. It was recorded with the county. It had been sitting in the public record for 23 years. My parents had hired a real estate agent, accepted an offer, set a closing date. For a house they did not have the legal authority to sell without my grandmother's fully informed, witnessed and documented consent that had not been obtained, because the conversation with my grandmother had been conducted in the language of company and attention. I wrote down the clause number. I wrote down the recording date, September 14, 1999. I circled it 3 times. Vera slid a second document across the desk. It was a letter, written in my grandfather's handwriting, dated 2 weeks before the deed was executed. Not a legal instrument. Not notarized. Just a letter in the file because Vera had kept it there for 23 years, because my grandfather had given it to her and said, "Keep this with the house papers, someone may need it someday." It was addressed to his children. My father was one of them. I read it once. Then I read it again. Then I asked Vera if I could have a photocopy. She had already made one for me. I drove home with the photocopy in the passenger seat in a manila envelope. I did not open the radio. I did not make any calls. I drove the 37 minutes in complete silence, and when I got home I sat at my kitchen table and read it a 3rd time. My grandfather had anticipated this. Not perfectly, not with names or specific scenarios, but he had known his family well enough to write it down. The week after my meeting with Vera, my phone began to ring in a different way. My mother called on a Tuesday to tell me that they'd found a wonderful place for Grandma, and that the transition was going to be really positive. She spoke about it the way people speak about a home renovation, as something that had been decided, was now in progress, and would be lovely when finished. She did not ask for my opinion. She did not ask whether I had questions. I asked one. "Has Grandma signed anything?" A pause. Then, "We're handling the paperwork. It's a lot for her to process." I said, "I'm sure." My sister Renata called on Thursday. She had a different tone, faster, more pointed. She told me the timing was sensitive, that the buyer had contingencies, that the senior facility had a limited number of units available, and if Grandma missed this window she might be waiting years. She told me the whole family had agreed this was the right thing. She used the phrase "the whole family" twice in 4 minutes, which meant she was not counting me. She said, "You know how Dad feels about this. He just wants what's best for her." I said, "I know." Then Eli called on Saturday morning and asked, directly with no preamble, whether I was going to be difficult about the house. I said, "I haven't decided yet." He said that Grandma would be better off, that the house was too much for her, that they weren't doing anything wrong, they were doing the hard thing, and it would have been nice if I could be supportive for once instead of making everything into a procedure. Making everything into a procedure. I wrote that one down too. I put the phone face down on my counter and I called David Marsh's office and I said, "Please send the letters." If you have ever watched people who couldn't spare a single Sunday afternoon suddenly find all the time in the world the moment a property is involved, You already know exactly where this goes. Stay with me. Because the letters were just the beginning. 2 weeks after the letters went out, certified mail return receipt requested, addressed to my parents, to the real estate agent, and to the title company handling the transaction, my mother called me a name I won't repeat and told me I had declared war on this family. I had not declared war. I had sent a letter from a licensed attorney informing all parties that the proposed sale of 114 Callaway Street was potentially void under the terms of a recorded life estate, that the property owner had not provided legally sufficient informed consent, and that any attempt to close the transaction without remediation could expose the sellers and their agent to civil liability. That is not war. That is paperwork. My parents held a family meeting. I was not invited to the family meeting. I found out about it from Phyllis, who attended and texted me from the bathroom. Renata had apparently said I was doing this for money. Marcus, calling in from Phoenix, had said I'd always had a chip on my shoulder. Eli had said I needed to mind my business. My father had been mostly quiet. My mother had said that my grandfather would be heartbroken by what I was doing. That one I found interesting. Given the letter. The gathering was scheduled 3 weeks later. My mother's house. A Sunday afternoon. She called it a family dinner. But Phyllis told me in advance that there was an agenda. There was going to be a presentation about the facility, a signing opportunity for my grandmother to formally consent, and then Phyllis's words, a conversation with you. I accepted the invitation. I said I'd bring dessert. I also brought a folder. I arrived 12 minutes early. I always arrive early. It is a professional habit and also a habit of knowing that the first person in the room controls the temperature of it. My grandmother was in the living room in the good chair, the one with the padded arms that she'd had reupholstered twice. She was wearing her green cardigan. She looked at me when I came in and she said, "There she is. The smart one. This is what she has called me since I was 7. I set my folder down on the side table and I hugged her and I did not let go for a long time. The room filled up. Renata arrived with her husband, Eli and his girlfriend, Marcus on a laptop screen propped on the bookshelf. My parents, moving around the kitchen with the coordinated efficiency of people who have been running this household together for 40 years. Dinner happened. I ate. I kept my folder on the side table. After dinner, my father cleared his throat. He had prepared something. He read it from his phone fax about the facility, the square footage of the unit, the activities program, the medical staff, the dining options. He talked about the house. The maintenance burden, the property taxes, the roof that needed replacing, the furnace that had been flagged twice in the last 3 years. He talked about the offer, the price, the timeline. He talked about what the proceeds would be used for. A trust for Grandma's care, with Renata and himself as co-trustees. He did not mention the life estate. He did not mention the letters. He did not mention the recording at the county clerk's office dated September 14, 1999. When he finished, my mother produced a document. A consent form prepared by someone, not Vera, not David, someone for my grandmother to sign authorizing the sale. She set it on the coffee table in front of my grandmother with a pen and said, gently, with the warmth of someone who has made a decision and now needs it ratified, "Mom, we just need your signature here." My grandmother looked at the paper. She picked up the pen. She looked at me. I said, "Grandma, you don't have to sign anything tonight." My mother said, "She's not being pressured." I said, "I know. I'm just making sure she knows her options." Renata said, "You have got some nerve." I said, "I'd like to say a few things if that's okay. I'll be brief." The room went quiet in the particular way that rooms go quiet when someone has announced they have a folder. I opened it. I put the recorded deed on the coffee table. I said, "This is a transfer on death deed executed by Grandpa in 1999. It transferred the house to Grandma. It also contains a life estate clause, recorded with the county, that guarantees Grandma the right to occupy the property for the remainder of her natural life. This is not a moral argument. It's a recorded instrument. The title company received a letter about it 3 weeks ago." My mother said, "We know about the deed." I said, "Then you know that the sale as structured is potentially void." I put the certified mail receipts on the table. These are the return receipts from the letters sent by my attorney. The real estate agent received hers on the 14th. The title company on the 15th. You received yours on the 16th. I looked at my father. You signed for it yourself. Eli said. This is insane. I put the appraisal on the table. This is the independent appraisal I commissioned. $340,000. The accepted offer is $336,500. Below appraised value. For a property the sellers don't have clear authority to convey. Renata stood up. She said some things. I won't reconstruct them because they weren't useful to the story, and because I'd already written them down later and I don't want to give them more space here than they deserve. She used the word vindictive. She used the phrase destroying this family. She looked at my grandmother and said, You see what she's doing to us? My grandmother said, Let her finish. I put the last item on the table. It was the photocopy of the letter. My grandfather's handwriting on yellow legal paper, slightly faded, dated October 3, 1999. I said, Grandpa wrote this 2 weeks before the deed was executed. Vera Gaines has kept it in the file since 1999. He addressed it to his children. I looked at my father when I said that. There's one line I want to read aloud. The room was very quiet. I read, Dolores has given this family everything she had and asked for nothing in return. The least we can do is make sure no one can take her home. Marcus on the laptop screen looked away. My father put both hands flat on the table and stared at them. My mother said very quietly, You don't know what it takes to manage her day to day. I said, I know. And I know you're tired. And I know you believe you're doing the right thing. I closed the folder. But the right thing and the legal thing are not the same thing right now. And neither of them is the same as what Grandma actually wants. I looked at my grandmother. I said, What do you want? She said, I want to go home. She meant Calloway Street. I picked up the consent form from the coffee table. I folded it once and put it in my folder. I said, Then we have some things to talk about. Not tonight. With attorneys present. I picked up my folder and my bag. I said, Thank you for dinner. I left before anyone answered. The sale did not close. The title company had already halted the transaction after receiving David's letter. The real estate agent withdrew rather than face liability. The buyers, who had their own attorney, found another property. My parents, after 2 weeks of silence, agreed to a mediated conversation with Vera Gaines and David Marsh present. It lasted 4 hours. I will not describe all of it. I will tell you the outcome. My grandmother remained at 114 Calloway Street. A proper care agreement was established. A licensed home health aide 4 days a week. Costs funded by a draw on a home equity line that Dolores herself authorized with Vera as her advocate. A durable power of attorney was executed, properly witnessed, with Vera's office holding a copy. The document named me as secondary agent, after a professional fiduciary, not my mother, not Renata, for any decisions related to the property. My parents received a formal accounting of the home equity arrangement. They signed it. My father did not look at me when he signed it, but he signed it. Renata sent me a text 2 weeks later that said, I hope you're proud of yourself. I did not respond. There was nothing useful to say. Marcus called from Phoenix. He said, I should have spoken up in that room. I said, Yes. He said, I'm sorry. I said, I know. We talked for 40 minutes about other things, and it was the longest conversation we'd had in 6 years. Eli has not contacted me. I expect that will change eventually. It may not. My Aunt Phyllis, who spent the entire dinner in the kitchen doing dishes and said nothing during the confrontation, sent me a card 2 days later. Inside she had written, Your grandfather would have been proud. I put it in the file. The one labeled 114 Calloway Street. The photocopy of the letter lives in my fireproof box now, between my own will and my grandfather's death certificate. I take it out sometimes and read the whole thing. It is 2 pages long. Most of it is practical, instructions about the house, preferences about how things should be handled. But the last paragraph is the one I return to. He wrote, "I know my family. I know they love Dolores, and I know they will convince themselves that whatever they do for her. So I am writing this down in the hope that, when the time comes, someone will read it and remember that love that cannot be documented is a very convenient kind of love." I have thought about that sentence a great deal. What I did was not revenge. I want to be precise about this. Revenge implies that I was trying to cause harm. I was not. I was trying to stop a transaction that was legally defective and morally wrong, using the same tools I use every day for clients who pay me to use them. The difference was that this time no one was paying me. The following spring, I drove to Callaway Street on a Saturday morning. My grandmother and I planted tomatoes in the side garden, the same spot she's used for 15 years. She told me what each variety was called. She told me which ones my grandfather had liked best. She told me she'd been thinking about painting the shutters again. They'd faded from that particular green she'd always wanted. I said, "Tell me the color and I'll get the paint." She said, "I already know the color. I've always known the color." She went inside to find the old can so we could read the label. I stood in the garden in the morning light, next to the rose bushes along the south fence, and I listened to the house settle around her the way houses do when they've been lived in a long time. Some things are worth documenting. Some things you do because they're right and the paperwork is just how you prove it. My grandfather knew the difference. He wrote it down so the rest of us would too. If this story reminded you that love without documentation is a very convenient kind of love, that quiet is not the same as weak, and that the people who show up deserve more than assumptions, take that with you. Update what needs updating. Have the conversation you've been putting off. And if someone in your life is counting on you to be the one who reads the paperwork, read it. Drop a comment. Tell me what you're thinking. Hit subscribe and I'll see you in the next one.